Hi, and welcome to another video by Get It Done Home Repairs. Today's project was to replace the older style dual control faucet with a more modern style single control faucet. The one I happen to be putting in is a Delta, but there's lots of different brands you can do. Alright, so let me take you along step by step, and I'm going to show you how we did this job. As you can see, the faucet is leaking. Whenever you turn it on, the water does come out. So what we're going to do is we'll go underneath the bottom and we're going to turn the valves off to make sure that the hot and the cold are both turned off. This is the valve on the hot side, and the other side over there is the valve on the cold side. So we have to make sure we close both those valves off totally. If they don't close all the way, then you'll need to go down to the main inlet down by the meter and shut the main supply of water off in the house. But in this case, these valves turn fairly easy. They don't really give any kind of a problem. So we're going to turn them all the way off, make sure when they seat, and then you just go just a little bit more, just to make sure that they're totally closed. And we're going to do the same thing on the hot side as well. Close it down all the way until it touches. And then once you feel it come in contact with the stopper, then you can go up to the top, open up the valves, and make sure that you have no water coming out at all up on the top. If water does continue to drain out, then of course you'll have to go down and shut the main off. Next thing we're going to do after we shut the water off, we're going to come underneath the bottom here, and we're going to loosen up those two on the bottom of the faucet. We're going to remove those two screws there, and we'll disconnect the lines from the faucet. Here is an example of what kind of tools you're going to need. We're going to use a new valve. This is a compression union valve, so we have two new valves. We're going to use a line cutter. We may need an adjustable wrench or two. We may need some vice grips. Of course, we're going to need some emery cloth to clean up the pipes, a rag to wipe off any kind of dirt that's there, some new supply lines, both hot and cold, and we have an assortment of different lengths just in case we need a longer or shorter supply line when we put everything back together. And of course we have our sealant, and then we have our plumber's putty here as well to go underneath the faucet. Alright, here's the faucet that we're going to be using. This just happens to be the one that I'm using. Yours may look different. We're going to come under the bottom. We're going to put a wrench on those two screws underneath there. They can be very tight because they've been on there for a long period of time. So we're going to break them loose. And if you have a very limited space to work, you put a wrench on it and break it loose one way, and then you flip the wrench over, and you can get another quarter turn or an eighth of a turn on it as well. We'll do the same thing on the other one, and you'll break them loose so that you can get up underneath there by hand to remove them once they're loosened up a little bit. Usually you turn them a couple of turns, and then you can take them out by hand. All right, once this one is removed, we'll switch over and do the exact same thing on the hot side. Now remember, it may be a tight spot underneath there. As you can see here, it is a fairly tight spot. So we're going to put our wrench on so we can get that counterclockwise rotation to break it loose. And then once we break it loose, then we can take it off by hand again. Now remember, when you turn it, if you can only get a slight turn out of it, you can turn the wrench over and you'll be able to get a little bit more of a turn at the same time. Turn the wrench over again. And we get a little bit of a turn again until you can get in there by hand, and you can remove it by hand. I might add, you want to have a bucket down below just in case you get a little bit of water leaking out of these pipes. It's a good idea to have a bucket or some rags underneath the sink area so that you don't have a little bit of a mess where you're working. Next, we're going to come up here with an adjustable wrench, and we're going to these caps are only made of plastic, so you can get in here and you can rotate them. Once they turn just a little bit, most of the time you can get in there break it loose a couple of turns, and then you can get up there by hand to remove it by hand. You may want to use some penetrating oil or some lubricant, so that way it rotates and it'll come out a little bit easier. All right, so let's take these two off right here, and we'll continue with the removal. Once we unscrew the two retainers that hold the faucet in place, we just pull the faucet out, and now we have a little cleaning up to do underneath the faucet before we put the new one back in. As you can see, it's been leaking for a long time, and it's just not worthwhile. So we're just going to clean this up a little bit. Once we clean it up, we'll go down the bottom, we'll take care of the valves down the bottom, and we'll continue with this job. So let's get these plastic lock rings out, and we'll continue. Next, we're going to put our cutter on the line, and we're going to cut the line to the desired height where we're going to install our new replacement valve. The replacement valve is going on there and a compression fitting, because we don't want to get in here with a torch to heat up the pipe to redo the solder in there, because it goes into the wall and we'll wind up having to deal with the plaster wall and repair it. So we elected to put this valve in place, and that way we'll have just two valves back there, one with the flexible line that connects to the top of it, and the other is just going to remain in place, and we're going to remain open with it. Next, we put our cutter on there, and we put the cutter on the pipe, and we just turn it just a little bit each time, and we tighten it a little bit each time and rotate it again, and the cutter will slowly cut into the pipe itself. And we just continue to tighten it up a little bit each time. And just tighten it up one more time, and it should do the job. You want to do it nice and easy. You don't want to tighten it up too tight and crush the pipe or damage the pipe. Next, we're going to determine the height of the other pipe, and we're going to put the cutter on there, and we're going to cut the second pipe to accommodate the new fitting as well. Okay, so we're going to continue cleaning the sink itself where the new faucet is going to go. We're just going to check it for fit to make sure everything fits in properly and that the bolts line up with the existing holes in the sink itself, which they do. We put a slight mark on the sink so that we can put the faucet exactly center of the holes. We're going to grab our plumber's putty, and we're going to fill every place that water can get through and get down to the cabinet below. We're going to put a small bead of plumber's putty on there. We're going to roll it into a band in our hands, and we're going to put it around the faucet, like I said, where the water can possibly get down into the lower part of the cabinet. We're going to put the faucet through, and we're going to line it up in the center of the holes that we previously marked with a pencil. Of course, pencil, because we can remove it later on. We're going to look to make sure that it's perfectly centered in the holes, which it is. And then we're going to go down underneath the bottom, and we're going to put the caps on the bottom and secure the faucet in place. Okay, while an assistant holds the faucet on the top in place for us, we're going to go underneath the bottom, and I know it's a little bit tight to see here, but we're going to screw the plastic lock rings on the bottom. We're going to screw them up just till it starts to touch, and then we're going to get the other one on. We're going to tighten that on at the same time, making sure that our assistant holds it so it's dead center of the hole. We don't want to be off one side or the other. We'll grab our second cap now, and we'll screw it on as far as we can. Now remember, with this, you don't need to use any tools to tighten it down. You just tighten it down as tight as you can by hand. Once we have it in exactly where we want it, and our assistant's holding it up top, we can snug it down, and that's it. The bottom down here will be nice and tight. Come back and tighten the other side one more time, and that's it. The bottom part is now finished. Let's go back up top, and we'll continue up there. Before we go back up top, I just want to point this out. The hot water line, it has a little tag on it that you know which is hot. As you can see up on top, the plumber's putty may squeeze out just a little bit. We can clear it away with a razor blade, a utility knife, any kind of tool that you have to remove the excess plumber's putty. At this point, you can take it away and just clean up the area, so that way it doesn't have all of the stuff sticking through and look like a messy job. All right, just going to wipe it away, and now we'll go back down on the bottom, and we're going to reconnect our valves down there. On the copper pipe, you want to use a very fine steel wool to clean off any kind of oxidation or corrosion that may be on the pipe itself. As you can tell, the pipe has been here for quite some time, and you know that the pipe does get oxidized. So we're going to clean it up with steel wool, then we're going to grab a rag, and we're going to make sure that we wipe off all of that filings or all of the oxidation that we took off the pipe itself. We'll clean it away with the rag, so it's a nice clean surface for the new valve with the compression coupling to bite into. The lock nut goes down first. We then put our collar on there, and then last but not least, we slide the valve over the top and make sure that the valve goes down all the way down into the pipe itself where it bottoms out. We are going to screw this on. It's a little difficult doing it one-handed, but we're going to screw the nut up with the ferrule so that it actually is in the location where you want. We're going to turn it to where we want to have the valve so it doesn't interfere with anything underneath the sink itself. Once we have a good location for it, we're going to grab our wrenches, and then we'll tighten everything up with this valve, and then we'll move over to the oven. Now with the valve, you want to hold the one valve itself with a wrench, and you want to tighten up the nut and the ferrule against the bottom of it. It's a little bit of a tight location, as you can imagine, but you want to hold the valve so it doesn't rotate, and then screw the nut all the way up until it's as tight as you can possibly make it, again holding the valve so it doesn't rotate at the same time. And once you have it tight, you can go in, and we're going to put the other valve on the other side, again making sure that it doesn't interfere with anything underneath the sink. Turns nice and freely, doesn't interfere with anything. Let's move over and do the other valve now. Well, once the second valve is on, we grab our flexible lines, and you want to make sure your line is long enough so that there's no kinks in it and it screws on perfectly straight. In this particular case, we're going to put a loop in the line because the line is too short to make the bend to go over to the valve that protrudes from the wall. So we need to put a loop in the line just so we can get it nice and straight. And we're going to screw this up, and what you want to be real careful with is you don't want to over tighten these hoses or lines on there, because there's a rubber seal inside the line itself that if you over tighten it, you'll destroy that seal, and then you'll wind up with a leak. So now that we have the one side caught, before we tighten it up, we make our loop, and we go around and we bring the second part of the line up to the valve, and you want to screw it on nice and easy by hand. You may need two hands to hold the line in place while you rotate it. And then once you have the lines caught, then you can grab a wrench and you can tighten up the lines themselves. All right, you want to be very careful. You want to hold the valve and tighten up the line itself. But remember, don't over tighten. It's just nice and easy. Now the other side that comes down from the faucet itself, you got to be a little more careful with that one up there. Now remember, as I said, the line itself, you want to make sure that the line is fairly centered in the top of the nut that you're going to be tightening down. In this particular case, I believe the nut was a 5/8, but yours may vary depending on what size line you're using. Once we have that caught, we're going to come over to the hot side over here. We're going to tighten it up as tight as we can by hand, and then we're going to grab 2 wrenches. One, we're going to hold the supply line from the faucet in place, and the other one we're going to tighten up the new line that we put on. It's very important that you hold that upper one at the same time, because if you don't hold the upper, it's just going to rotate and it's not going to get any tighter. So now we're going to get our wrench, put it on here, hold it in place, and then we'll tighten up the bigger supply line at the same time. Next, we're going to move over to the second valve. This is our cold water line right here. We cleaned it up with the emery cloth so it's nice and clean. Again, we grab a rag and wipe off any of the sediment or any of the dirt on there. We're going to slide the nut for the new valve on there. We're going to put our washer on there, or the new ferrule. We'll slide it down as far as we can possibly go. Then we'll grab our new valve and we'll put the new valve on. And remember, the valve has got to bottom out, so put the valve on as far as you can and slide it all the way down till it touches. Very important that the pipe sticks all the way up into the valve as far as it can go. You don't want to catch it by just the very end of it. And we're going to tighten on the nut onto the valve itself. And before we put the valve anyplace, we're going to bring it to the location we want to have the valve so it's accessible, so we can rotate it and turn the valve on and off as needed. Once we determine the location, we're going to come in here with the 2 wrenches and we're going to hold the valve in place, and we're going to turn that nut up, and we're going to crush that ferrule inside the valve so that the faucet itself, so that the valve doesn't leak through that compression fitting. All right, so let's tighten it up. Once it's tight, we'll come back and we'll put that second line on, and we're going to get this job wrapped up. Okay, so once everything is tight now, we're going to come in here, we're going to slowly turn the valves on to make sure that the water doesn't leak at all. In this particular case, we'll turn on the back valve that was really close against the wall itself. And then once that valve is fully open, we'll come up and we'll open up the new valve that we installed for the hot side now. You want to open it up nice and easy, just in case you have any leaks. You can close the valve quickly and tighten it up if needed. As you can see, it's nice and dry. There's no leaks at all. Run your finger around all the fittings just to make sure that there's no leaks. And like I said, if there is a leak, just get in there with the wrench and you can just snug it down until it's nice and tight. We're going to do the exact same thing on the cold side now. We're going to turn the water on the cold side, and then we're going to come up underneath the bottom. We'll turn that valve, that compression valve that we just put in there. We'll put that valve, turn that in the on position as well. And again, just run your finger along any of the couplings just to make sure it's not leaking. If it is leaking, just grab the 2 wrenches and you can snug it all back down a little bit tighter, and that should be it. All right, we're going to go up now. We'll turn the water on. We should get a little bit of an air pocket coming out at the same time. We're going to test it hot and cold to make sure that it works properly. We'll let it run for maybe a minute or so just to flush out any kind of sediment or anything that may wind up inside the faucet itself. And lastly, we're going to go down underneath the bottom. We're going to take one more look to make sure everything is nice and dry. If everything is dry, we're in good shape. If it leaks a little bit, remember what I told you. Just grab a wrench and you can get in there and tighten it up just a little bit. Now remember that the lines themselves have that rubber fitting inside there, so you have to be careful you don't over tighten it and wind up destroying the rubber. It has it on both sides of the new valve itself, just like this. Has the rubber seal built onto the line itself, so be real careful you don't over tighten it and damage it. Usually it's just fairly snug and you'll be in good shape. And that's it. This job is then actually finished. Okay, so as you can see, replacing the faucet is really not that difficult. In this particular case, with the valves behind were too close to the wall, and we didn't want to cut the wall open, so we elected just to put in another valve in upstream of where the other valve was. There was a lot of solder around on there, as well as some kind of a concrete type mixture too, so that's what we were a little reluctant to replace that valve. I didn't want to have to cut the wall open, so that's what I elected to do, to use a compression fitting style valve on the upstream portion above the other valve. But that's it. This job is done, and we're on to the next. All right, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.